Talent asked me earlier on if I could share the experiences that I'd personally been through in relation to country living. To be honest with you, I've never actually shared this in a group before. I've shared my personal testimony about how I became Christian, but not the journey in the sense of the country living. And I think it's probably good that Talent's just started there saying that the experiences that Hope's had, that I've had, they're not really templates for other people. There's not really a set pattern. God deals with very much in different ways, but hopefully there are principles that we've all picked up along the way that in sharing can be a blessing to other people who are perhaps looking to follow the same route. So that's the intention for this evening. I don't intend to go on too long. When I was thinking about kind of how this can be most helpful for other people, I was reminded of a story that I want to share just briefly of Pavel Goya, who many of you will probably be familiar with. I have his book actually in front of me here. It's called In the Spirit and Power. Just came out a year and a half ago, something like that. And it's about Pavel Goya's personal journey. And if you've seen any of his sermons, you'll be aware this man is full of stories. And one of the stories he shares, I don't know how many of you have heard this, but I hadn't heard it before, was when he was young in communist Romania. He was selected. So God blessed him with a lot of academic ability, because to go to university, there were 976 applicants for just 10 spaces at this university. And Pavel Goya recounts that he was actually in the examinations that they had, he came fourth, and therefore was given a very prestigious entrance to this university. But you know, if as I say, you know anything about his family, you know anything about his upbringing, his dad was a very faithful Adventist, even though it was very, very challenging times to live out your faith. And so Pavel didn't attend the lectures that they had on the Saturday. And this soon became noticed, and as week after week went, people were starting to make more and more comments, and it got to the point where the head of the course, I think, said to him, look, unless you attend these courses on the Sabbath, we will remove you from this university. You will be kicked out. And so Pavel said, well, I'm not going to do that. I am going to keep with keeping the Sabbath, as my God shows that I should. And she said, well, that's your choice. You know, if you don't come this Sabbath, that's it, you're out. Now, to Pavel, this was a really, really big issue, because he'd studied so hard. And in Romania, I'm not from, obviously not from communist Romania, but if you didn't have that education, he describes that your life is completely changed. It's far harder to have the settled life that certainly he was hoping for, should we say, without finishing that university course. But he wasn't going to break the Sabbath. So he knew it was the reason I'm saying this parallel is he knew it was God's will to keep the Sabbath, but he was having issues with the way this would actually fulfill in his life. Now, so he went home and he prayed, and he said, God, you've got to help me here. I want to be faithful. I want to keep your Sabbath. So can you just sort out the situation? I'm putting my words here. Can you just sort out the situation so that I can keep your Sabbath, but also finish this course? And he said, I just wasn't getting any answers from prayer. I just nothing happened. It felt so wrong. And in the end, he ended up calling his dad, and he explained the situation to his dad. And his dad said, what do I do? What do I do in this situation? And his dad told him, Pavel, you need to go and find another God. And Pavel's like, what do you mean? What on earth does that supposed to mean? Why am I supposed to find another God? He said, this is not how God works. He is the master. You are the servant. You just open up and say, look, if it is for your glory, it is for your honor for me to be on this course. If I can shine a light to the people on this course, then keep me on the course. If, on the other hand, your mission is better served for me being away from this course and having another life, then fulfill that as well. But I leave it in your hands. But he found this really, really hard prayer to do. So because basically his dad had given this advice, And indeed, he realized when he heard the advice that it was the right advice. But he really, really struggled to actually put this into practice. So, but he understood that God can't work with half-committed Christians, was basically the principle that he understood from that. So he went and he said, God, you know my heart. You know what's inside me. But I'm going to make that commitment that whatever happens, I'm going to follow you. And if that means being on the course, that's fine. If it's not in the course, that is also okay. So he went to the course on the Thursday, and he felt at peace after that prayer that he hadn't felt before. So he turned up on the Thursday, and things were much the same. And the teacher was saying, look, you're a fanatic. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You are not going to stay on this course. There's no God in heaven for a start. If there was a God in heaven, he couldn't save you from this government. And she was quite brutal to him in some ways. But he's like, no, there is a God, and it's his choice. A bit like Daniel or Daniel's friends. And so he stayed strong. And it come to the Friday, and on that Friday, the same teacher came in, and she was absolutely white as a sheet. And she said, Pavel, I need you to come here. And he said, okay. He said, do you know anyone in the government? He says, no. Do you know the high-ranking ministers or anyone who is associated with the government? He went, no, I don't. And he thought she was kind of joking a little bit. And then she said, do you know, I think it's Ceausescu, but do you know the president? And he thought, no, she's got to be joking. Yeah, of course I know the president. I think he was being a bit sarcastic. He said, no, I've seen him on TV, but that's to the extent to which my knowledge is. And she turns around and said to him, there is a God in heaven. And this is the same woman who said, no God can ever save you, even if God exists. And he said, what's made you change your mind? He said, this morning on the television, it was announced that because of the economic situations in this country, they're going to save money. And every single educational institution is going to close on a Saturday, starting today. And then Pavel realized so God didn't answer the prayer for him, in a sense. The entire country's educational institutions were shut down on that Sabbath from that day. And he realized what was the hindrance to his prayer. And he thought about that. My prayer was self-centered. It had a touch of self in there. It's, yes, I wanted to fulfill God's will, but I wanted to fulfill it kind of in my way. I wanted to do the course and then further on to serve God. It wasn't really a bad intention, but he was praying. His prayer was wrong. It was kind of had self in there. And as his dad advised, obviously extremely good advice, to say, no, you can't have that. God won't be listening to your prayer if it's got self at its center. And once that was removed, and he said, look, how can I glorify you? How can I make you better known? Is there someone in this college that I can reach? Or is my relationship with you better served by being out of this course? And then he felt that peace, and then the power came. And as I say, the reason I share that, I think it's a beautiful little story. That book, if you want to get it, it's full of, to be honest, my wife's read the whole thing. I've actually only just started. It was given as a present, but the book is full of prayer and how prayer is answered and when prayer is not answered. And it's a fascinating little insight from one man's experiences. So the reason I share that is because to some extent there are some parallels with country living, in the sense that we are aware from the writings from both the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy that it is a good thing to move into the countryside. But do we kind of have a similar, or is it possible, should we say, to have a similar attitude where we say, I want to go to the countryside because you tell me, but I don't want to go where it's too far from my family, or I don't want to go where it's too cold, or it's not going to work because I'd have to change job, or I don't know, you continue the list. It's really what is going to honor and what is going to serve you more fully. And the moment I think that prayer, the angle or the tenet of that prayer changes, certainly from people's experiences, you found that change coming along. And certainly for Pavel, it was a peace. So, and that's an amazing outcome as well. So with that introduction, which I admit was a little longer than I was expecting, I'm just going to share a little bit about the experiences that I went through. And as I say, hopefully you can just little bits here and there that might be able to apply. Obviously, you've all got completely different lives and completely different family situations and completely different work environments. None of those things are bad, incidentally. Obviously, family, that's a good thing. You need to look after your family. Work, you need to go to work. So it's not that they're bad. It's that the moment the family or the work is an impediment to what God is calling you to do, you are putting that family or you're putting that work above God. And that cannot be. That cannot be. We all know on this that cannot be. So we have to deeply kind of soul search, because we can kind of justify to ourselves, oh, but I can't do that. And it kind of feels a good reason, because I need to look after my family. No one's going to argue with that. But the point is, at what point do we say, do you know what, that's going above what God is asking us to do? So in my own experience, I became Christian 2009. I was baptized. I got better from my illness in 2010. Oh, sorry, no, still 2009. It was just the later part. And then I had the blessing, much to my own surprise, because I'd come to the conclusion that I'd never get married. But I had the blessing of being married in 2012. And when I was married, because we had the ceremony in Britain, but my wife is from Brazil, we went to Brazil so that they could take part in like a kind of second ceremony, because obviously they couldn't travel all that way. And when I was in Brazil, in the town I'm actually speaking from at the moment, I visited the Adventist schools here, the colleges, the universities, the TV station, the radio station, the colporteuring training center, the clinics, the printers, it was an Adventist dentist. Do you see what I mean? Almost everything here structurally was led the community to the Bible. So, for example, when we visited the Adventist TV station, they employed 12 people full time just to create Bible studies for members of the public who were going through their TV, land on channel, whatever it is, kind of get their ideas caught, and they actually write in personal questions, and they actually had a team of people whose full-time job it was to create Bible studies, like tailor-made Bible studies for these people. So I'm just trying to read the comments as they come up, and it blew me away. It blew me, because I come from Britain and I'd seen what the Adventist church was like in the UK, and to some extent that's a wider issue of Europe, in which, as well as I do, the institutions that support the church are, let's be honest, really, really weak. And that is a real problem for evangelism. So here, you hardly need to do evangelism, because people turn up at the church because they've watched the TV stations online, or there's 100 other ways in which people learn of the gospel. So I thought, wouldn't it be great? We've got all these Adventists in the UK with so many amazing talents in health, in music, in evangelism, in teaching, in whatever. Wouldn't it be? But the one thing that we alwa't lack is a place. So wouldn't it be great when God is saying, go to the countryside, that we could kind of combine the two and get a place that Adventists could use as an outpost center in whatever form that might take, as I say, evangelism, printing, missionary work, health, whatever it might be. I don't know. That's God's choice, because it'll be God's place. And we can get things going, in a sense, from what felt like a fairly stalled position for the last few years, if not last few decades. So I looked at a map and I saw that there were gaps within the UK, where I looked on the SDA website and I saw that there were like churches, like, I don't know how many churches we have in London, but it's an awful lot. Birmingham, I think, had 38 churches, something like that. I was just astonishing. But there were areas of the country that had like zero Adventist presence, as far as I can see from a Adventist.org map, right? So they were the south bit of Wiltshire going down into Dorset, where there didn't seem to be any Adventist group at all at the time. I know there is now Salisbury, but Salisbury wasn't really running at the time. There was a tiny house group at Devizes, but Salisbury didn't exist at the time. There was a gap in North Devon. And then pretty much when you get the very north of England, maybe a little to the northeast, but generally speaking, it was Scotland. The south bit of Scotland, there were 6 counties without a single Adventist group. And the northwest of Scotland also didn't have an Adventist group. So I was talking to my wife and I was like, we should go to one of these areas, because this message needs to spread. So there's no point in us going in a country place just outside, I don't know, Birmingham, then we'll say, because there are so many Adventists in Birmingham already. And that's not, from my reading of the spirit of prophecy in the Bible, God is trying to get this message evenly spread out there. And if he has his people in the villages or in the Isles of Scotland or wherever it might be, these people need to be told too. So we started looking for a place, and I'm trying to remember it was about that time we were blessed with funds to purchase a place. I can't quite exactly remember the order. I think some had come in, but not all. So it was kind of drifting in at that time. And we looked up towards Scotland because that was where those gaps were. And we visited a place called Ettrick, if anyone's ever heard of it. We traveled all the way up. But when we got there, it immediately didn't feel right. The building was very small. The land was great, but it was too cut off from people. It was like really, really in the country. So, and we didn't want to do mission work. We wanted to be in reasonably accessible to people. So we wanted to be close to a town, but in the country, if you see what I mean. So we, like Elijah did, travel into the cities to witness, but then come out to live. So this place just felt too far from basically any other habitation, even though it was on the edge of a village. So we decided, no, that wasn't right. So we came back down south again and then found another place. And as soon as we got it, as soon as we saw it on the web, we made an arrangement, and then we came up to East Ayrshire, which is where this place was. It's actually the place we've ended up with. And the moment we saw it, we went, this feels right. It's got an area we can turn into a classroom. It's got land. It kind of almost like ticks all the boxes that the spirit of prophecy says was helpful. It's got its own water supply. It's got plenty. In fact, it had more land than we actually wanted, to be honest. It was a bit of a mess. In fact, it was quite a mess inside. So we immediately knew it was going to be quite a lot of work. The interior was really quite poor, but generally speaking, the location was great. We can be in Glasgow in 40 or so minutes, 45 minutes. And there's other towns, quite big towns, fairly close by. So we said, that's great. It was quite an old building, so we'll have a structural survey. And we said, we'll call the surveyor. We'll get things going. We'll call the surveyor, and he can draw up the paper. We'll do the survey. And if that's all fine, we're happy to buy the house. So the surveyor was on holiday. He was away for 2 weeks. And we said, okay, we'll just wait till he comes back. Won't be a problem. But after a week and a half, we got a phone call from the estate agent, and the estate agent said, I'm ever so sorry, but the place you were looking at has been sold to someone else. Someone else has just immediately made an offer. And I was actually driving along the M4 at the time. I don't remember exactly where I was. And we were quite surprised, because we really felt as though God had taken us up there for a reason, to see it. To see, what, that fits great with the purposes for which he's shown us. And as I say, we weren't trying to narrow something down. If it wanted to be a printer's, then it'd be a printer's. If it wanted to be a health clinic, but this place would have seemed to have been okay for any of these issues. So we said, look, so we prayed as we were driving along. The moment we received the news, we prayed and said, look, it's your place. If you wanted to give it, if it's your will, give it back to us, in a sense. And that was our prayer. But we said we won't look for anywhere else, because that place felt right. And we didn't. So that was October. And that would have been 2012. And November, December, January, February, March, we didn't look for anywhere else. We just said, look, if God gives it back to us, he'll give it back to us if it's his will. And then it got to April, and I said to my wife, look, perhaps we need to consider looking somewhere else. So that was a Monday. And in the evening of that Monday, we just had a little search online. We looked at places in Devon. I have many connections down in Devon. And there were some beautiful, beautiful places, like nicely out in the country, really nice houses. If anyone's been to Devon, if anyone knows Devon, to be honest, it's quite posh. So it's a really, really pretty part of the world. Many people obviously need to be reached there. And as I say, I'd already identified that many parts of Devon, you have the group in Exeter, kind of a small group in Yeovil, but a lot of Devon, it's got a real problem if people want to visit a church, certainly. But it felt wrong. Do you know what I mean? It felt as though, well, this is a lovely place for me and my family, but it doesn't feel right for what God is calling us to do at this time in history. Because at the end of the day, you get a nice house, it doesn't matter where you get it, it's going to all be burnt and destroyed. So if it's not useful for the gospel, if it's not useful for heavenly purposes, it has no value whatsoever. So that was on a Monday night. Tuesday morning, and I'd already said, this isn't right. Tuesday morning, I'm at work. I get a phone call from a woman with a Scottish accent. I said, hello. She said, do you remember me? And it's like, yeah. It's the estate agent up in Scotland. I was like, right. That house that you looked at 6 months ago, you're not gonna believe this, but the people, they had all their stuff in boxes. They'd actually moved some stuff out to their new place. And I don't know, until this day, I don't know what it is. But they said the buyer had to pull out literally on the day they were moving. I don't even know how that happened, because surely they would have transferred the money. But anyway, they hadn't. There was a delay. But the current owners had literally everything in boxes. But the people buying on the very last day pulled out. And so the estate agent said, well, are you still interested? And I went, I think we are, I think we are. That was a Tuesday. By Wednesday, whatever time, I was at Newbolds just for a little time, and finished the class there and went back, and we just drove straight up to Scotland. Saw it the Thursday morning, because obviously the length of journey. Saw it first thing on the Thursday morning and said, yeah, we'll buy it here and now. And we thought, do you know what? The survey's probably not needed. We'll assume it's pretty structurally safe. So we purchased it into the place we still have now. So we really did feel at the time that it was, and I think many people on this group will testify that sometimes God gives you an intense feeling that something is his will or something is not. And in this case, the moment we saw it, we felt this is the right place. This is the place that God has called us to be. And we just needed to wait for 6 months for it to come, but that was not a problem at all. Praise him that it came our way, and that he'd also given us the funds, because certainly it was nothing I did, I can guarantee you that, to actually purchase the place. I'm going to just finish by reading a couple of quotes from the Spirit of Prophecy. I'll just check the time a second. Yeah, 32. Just check the time. There's a couple of quotes from the Spirit of Prophecy. The first one is from Sons and Daughters of God, page 188. And it says, the title is The Warning Against Prayers That Have Self as the Source. Our petitions to God should not proceed from hearts that are filled with selfish aspirations. God exhorts us to choose the gifts that will redound to his glory. And there's another quote from the Testimonies, volume 4. It says, but many who profess the faith know not what true conversion is. They have no experience in communion with the Father through Jesus Christ, and have never felt the power of divine grace to sanctify the heart. Praying and sinning, sinning and praying, their lives are full of malice, deceit, envy, jealous, and self-love. The prayers of this class are an abomination to God. True prayer engages the energies of the soul and affects the life. He who thus pours out his wants before God feels the emptiness of everything else under heaven. So there's obviously nothing wrong with saying to God, this is what I want. He calls us to come to him and say, this is what I want. But it has to be within the context of fulfilling God's desires for us at this time. Because if we choose what we want, and if we choose what our hearts are leading us to, we'll be unhappy and we won't have a strong relationship with God. Our happiness lies in a fulfillment of what God's purpose. So, and it reminds me a little bit, very soon after, and I'm not saying ours is a rule by any means. As I say, Hope will have his own story. Herbert perhaps the same. There were several people who've moved out not far from Birmingham into Wales, I think, recently as well. But it reminds me of a little conversation I had with a pastor when I first came up to Scotland. And it wasn't easy. So it certainly wasn't easy for my wife. She spoke English. When she came to England, I should add, she spoke no English at all. When she first met me, she said hello, and that was where the conversation ended, because she didn't know a single other word of English. So many of you won't have been to our area of Scotland, but my goodness, it has an accent that you could cut with a knife. It's a really, really strong accent. So it's almost for her as though she had to learn English all over again, and she found that ever so hard because socially it was harder. It was harder to witness. It was also harder to get to know the neighbours as well. But she persisted, and whilst it's still a bit of a challenge, she did. We have got to the point now she can speak in a sense with the locals. But it reminded me, as I say, of a discussion I had a pastor when I was first up in Scotland, in which they were doing a mission trip for the youth. I think what I'm going to say to you is probably going to ring bells in many of your ears. But they were doing a mission trip, and it was to somewhere really. I don't think it was Hawaii, but it was somewhere like Hawaii. And I said, okay, what's involved in this mission trip? Because I was being asked to share news of this. And they gave me the itinerary of what this mission trip to Hawaii was like. And the evangelism part of this mission trip, to be honest with you, was about half a day out of the 10 that they were going. The rest was kind of tourism. And I was like, there's nothing wrong with having a break and having a holiday, really. We need to come away and rest sometimes. But please don't advertise something as a mission trip that is not a mission trip. It is, you're using a kind of almost like a holy phrase, but you're mixing it with something that is not. And in the end, in fairness to him, they did change the phrase. They stopped using the term mission trip, which I was quite pleased at, because I think it's quite offensive to God when you start to mix those two things together. And as I mentioned before, just as a conclusion, many of the things you can justify. So country living, you could make selfish. How can I keep myself safe? How can I put myself in a nicer environment, away from the traffic, away from the noise, obviously away from the sinful behavior? And none of these things are bad, but they're things that God deals with, not us, to be honest with you. As long as we go where he's sending us to go, and as long as we have that mentality, which, to be honest, I know on this call, I feel like I'm preaching a bit to the converted, because I know many of you do this much, much better than I do, in terms of surrendering. Look, I'm not going to put any blockage in the path of the Holy Spirit. So if it is, in the middle of Iceland by a volcano, if it is the hottest desert, if it is somewhere that's really, really challenging, I don't mind if I have to sleep on the floor, if I have to, whatever. You just go where you're sending me to go. And I know, because from our experience, we know God looks after us. I can trust in you, God, that you will take care of us. And then wherever he sends us, we'll be able to look after our families, but they won't be the first place. We'll be able to provide for them with the jobs, but that won't be first place either. And God will lead us, as I believe there are even testimonies tonight. I heard through the week through my wife that Shavert and Danny had some really good news in this department as well. And I long for the day where every single name on this call can perhaps come and I can listen to the testimonies that you've had on the same line. So thank you for blessing me with listening to what I've just shared. And if you have any questions, feel free. If not, maybe I'll pass back a little bit to Talent. I'll just open it up for any questions just for a few seconds in case there was something I perhaps missed out.
I have a question, but I've just found your testimony really inspiring, especially bringing the focus back to if it's going to bring glory to God, because I think for myself and my family, we are looking for somewhere to move to, and a lot of the time too, we're like, we need to get out. We've got 2 children. We want children out of the cities and that kind of thing. And sometimes you do lose the focus that, Lord, we will go wherever as long as it's bringing glory to your name. And I just want to thank you for reminding us of that. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Yeah. It's not easy to be a fully committed Christian. I'm not going to pretend, and I'm a long way from that myself. But thank you for your thoughts. Yeah.
The question is, how off-grid have you managed to get to? That's first question. And the second question is, maybe what sort of lessons have you learned? With the journey, it's a journey, it's not a destination. With the journey, since the start, any mistakes and pitfalls even that we may need to avoid?
Sure. So the first of those, in terms of being off grid, it's a gradual process in many respects. But I'm pleased to say, originally it came with its own water supply and its own sewage system. So that's all taken care of into the water, and we were able to slightly talk with. Well, there's actually a limit on a domestic dwelling that you're not allowed to put up more than 16 solar panels. But I said, no, but we've got more than one building. It's one property, but we've got more than one building. And they actually were okay with that. So we were able to put up 32 solar panels, which I preferred rather than a wind turbine because of various reasons. So we have 32 solar panels and the water. And yeah, and then last year we really kind of progressed quite well. Well, I was quite pleased with growing things in our little garden. So that's quite labor intensive, but we're in a much better situation now than we were 3 or 4 years ago with that. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, maybe before you move on to the next one, I was going to say.
Carry on.
Yeah, I was going to ask because the academic advice that I'd had was solar panels are really only as good as Liverpool, and south of that. Have you found your yield? I mean, the energy that you're able to be really good?
Without wishing to be technical, I mean, ideally, the issue is not where you live, because you can have solar panels anyway. I mean, the further north you go, the brighter it stays for much of the year, especially in the summer, because obviously it starts to get light about 4:30 in the morning. So I don't really have an issue there. Potentially, they're helpful to have batteries, because obviously most electricity you use is when it's dark, but no, we have found them useful. I don't. The south of Liverpool thing, actually, some parts of Scotland are brighter. The issue is not temperature, of course; it's brightness. So
it's light, yeah.
The solar panels actually are at their full capacity when it's snowing, or when it's snowed, because the brightness reflects off the snow.
All right.
And very, very bright days. So sometimes we think of solar panels and we think of sun, and therefore we think of heat, but that's not really the way they work. So they just need brightness.
Yeah.
And I believe Glasgow is as bright as Bristol and brighter than Manchester. I think most places are brighter than Manchester, actually. But anyway, every time we dive south, it's always cloudy. So the further north, and I think even when you even go towards perhaps Hope's neck of the woods, it can be quite bright up there. So I don't think that really, whoever said that, I'm not actually sure that would be the case. That would be worth checking, because they don't work on temperature; they work on brightness. So
yeah,
Iceland is a very bright country, So not for some part of the year. To be honest, I've forgotten what the second. Oh, what lessons had I learned? For the second question, if I'm going to be brutally honest, the only thing I wish really kind of would have preferred to have learned earlier was to not try and work with the church, the organized church. They really were reluctant to even do the basics to try and work together on this one, really. And so I wish I'd done things independently much, much sooner. They have rules in place about self-supporting ministries and what they will recognize and what they will help and what they will advertise that are unbelievably I don't agree with them. I'm trying to be polite, but I don't agree with them. And it's not surprising that only one ministry in the UK is actually officially recognised as self-supporting. Certainly last time I checked, I don't know if that's changed in the last year, but to my knowledge, the only one is Advent Press, which is different from Advent Books. Darren Bullock's ministry.
I know Advent Press, because Advent Press, I'm sure, has been working with the General Conference. Is probably the reason why it's recognized.
Yeah, because they sell their stuff to the conference. They sell the Pathfinder stuff. They actually print the materials and the clothing and stuff like that. So they're very closely linked. But it's really, really hard. I'll just give you one example, right? So they normally want you to put the assets of whatever you're doing in a trust, and that trust would normally be run by 5 independent people, which would include your local pastor and perhaps other people within the church setting. Now, if you're a married couple like myself and my wife, we are 2 people. You then have a board of 5. That would allow 3 people in the church to sell, in our sense, the asset would be the house. So they would actually be legally allowed to sell your house without your permission.
Yeah.
Basically kick you out, then take the proceeds and then sell it, which has happened in some places in the world. So you're not likely to give a X number of pounds asset, we're talking many hundreds of thousands of pounds, into the hands of people you hardly know on a trustworthy basis that they will look after it really well, because so many times in the church they clearly don't. Otherwise they'd have their own health centers, they'd have their own mission schools and outpost centers, and they don't have any. So they're clearly not particularly skilled in this department. So that was a frustration. Oh, hi Sandra. And so working with groups like yourselves, obviously, I don't think he's on the call, but Chris McBean up in north of Scotland, people do, we ran courses for many years. We ran health retreats for several years. We're looking to restart that. We've been a venue for youth retreats, including, as I say, Chris McBean from up north, he's looking to do one again. So the place has been used. We're looking just this year to just notch that up a bit, so it's more fully used. But to do that really is much easier to work with independent groups.
I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry to say, I wish what you said was wrong. But yes. I wish it was wrong, but it's not. And fortunately, on our part, God showed us that way before we started self-supporting ministry. We had tried to do this within, and it was clear that we were not going anywhere fast. And it's all these systems, like you were saying. If God has given you a property and it's where the ministry is based, what business is the church trying to control your God-given house? And it's just a shame, really. But also, it is not meant to take us by surprise. We are surprised because we don't read. But that's basically what the Bible says. We are only surprised because we don't read the scripture as well. And sometimes we have to experience these very painful things. And then when we start reading, we realize how wrong we were to ever think that it would actually work.
Having said that, that's not to say we're not going to get any help from the organized church. In fact, the motif of the work is found in the time of the first Advent. There were many people, leaders, who rejected the message. And not only did they reject the message, but they fought against the message as a result. But God still had people within that very system that were lined up to forward the work within the organized church. It was Zachariah who was found worthy to give birth to John the Baptist, and he was the high priest. But yet John the Baptist was separate from that system and forwarded the same work that his father had started. And it was people like prophetess Anna, Simeon, who were waiting for the coming of the Messiah, and many such like. So you will find each time there was people within the system, few who were within the rabbinical system, who were interested in the work. And there was Nicodemus, who was interested in the message, but for fear of being thrown out of the synagogue, he had to go to Christ by night. So we are not to say that God has not got people in the system. Overall, yes, we can see the trends. We can see the leaders, people like Ganin Diop, Ed Wilson. They're doing some very interesting things. But at the end of the day, while many of the leaders are following policy, and Sister White talks about it, that there are people who are only motivated by policy and not principle. You'll find a lot of those, but it's not going to be a foregone conclusion that the whole system is gone. So just as a disclaimer, for example, we were actually helped by two very prominent leaders in the conference, and we thank God ever so much. God, it was God's providence. It was at a time when our backs were against the wall and we couldn't get out of the situation, and God used the presidents of the conference, the pastors and leaders in the conference. We are ever so truly thankful for Pastor Keck Thomas, BUC Director of Personal Ministries. He managed to proffer to us 3,000 great controversy for the coronation of Prince Charles. 3,000, and I think more than 300 minutes of healing, and he was even willing to give us more. And previously to that, for the COP26, he had given us 2,000 books, 1,000 each, great controversy and Ministry of Healing. That was COP26 before it. And then we were given a bump blessing by Pastor Ebenezer Daniel, and in his capacity in the North England Conference office as Personal Ministries Director. These are people that God places strategically in this office, despite some of the efforts that are being put by some of the leadership and some of their Jesuit leaders who will be agitating these things within the network. But yeah, I do feel you. I've also had some very negative experiences trying to work with the organized church. So it's neither here nor there, but I mean, there's people who are willing to work for God and to work for the right reasons and finish the work within that system, although they are few and far between.
Hello, hi everyone. Happy Sabbath. Thanks, Justin, for that testimony. I think it's great to hear that, putting self aside is the first step to any instruction that God gives us, and taking up his will and his duty for us. So thank you for reminding us of that. And and it's quite inspirational to see that you and Rosanna are both working to the capacity that you can, not just for your family, but also to support the community. So yeah, I mean, Danny and I have just been through a very, very challenging journey, but God is faithful. I do have a question, and my question was more in terms of character development, because I know that it is reiterated time and time again that this is what God desires the country to be, to develop character in us in preparation for his return. So my question was just, how have you found that side of things in your character, or Rosanna, or the family altogether? How has that been unfolding for you in the different aspects of what country living involves?
I think sometimes it's hard to judge character in yourself. I think we've all experienced those, those times where you're just praying and you're saying, look, I'm sorry. So it's hard to really judge that one. But I do believe, for a number of reasons, what I read in Country Living all those years ago, and not just Country Living, actually, it comes from many other sources as well, where that connection with nature. I mean, actually, several people on this call will have actually been to our place. So Shavert, you're one of them. That connection with nature is helpful. You can go out and pray in the woods, by the street, by the river, and not be interrupted if you have the time, and you're not going to be interrupted by neighbors. You don't have a problem there as well. So there are many advantages, certainly for within prayer. You can just, I don't know whether I can enunciate it very well. I don't really know how to put it into words, but I just kind of feel I have experienced what the writings say. That separation somehow, it does something. I'd say I'm really not going to be able to put this into words very well, but it does, basically the words say it, so I do believe it. But to some extent I can back that up because I feel I have experienced it as well. And many people hope, as I say, might be another one to be able to say the same thing. But when I never really lived in a city when I was Christian. Although I was in Swindon, it was a very, very quiet part. So perhaps the transition was less strong than perhaps it might be for a few other people. But I didn't really have the connection with nature that in the town I lived. Yeah, it is good. I just don't know how to put it into words. Sorry.
That's okay, thank you. Maybe I'll just ask the question in a different way then. I think I just mean in terms of like, because we're all still learning and growing into saints. I think maybe the question now was really trying to understand, because I think the journey, like Brother Talent says, is not a destination but a journey, helps us see ourselves in a way that we probably haven't seen before. And that's what God's Holy Spirit really intends to do, with showing us defects in character and showing us, it's not necessarily judging, but it's just the work of the Holy Spirit bringing to the forefront what, through country living, the character change that we need to make. So I think my question was just in regards to that relationship with the Lord. How have you found that in terms of working with him? Say, for example, has it because I know country living can be quite busy actually. Some people forget that there's a lot to do in the country that can actually impact negatively on your spiritual life as well, because you don't spend enough time in God's word or spend enough time in prayer. So I think my question is just like, how have you found that balance, that challenging?
Actually, that's a really good point. Before I forget, I'm going to say one thing before I answer that, and that is I've seen what I can see is the effect on children. I've only got one, sorry, on my daughter. So it's much, much easier to control certain aspects of her life, which you want to do. My daughter is still very young; she's only 3. So when we visit people in the cities, obviously they mingle with their neighbors, their back gardens are joined, and they go here, there, and everywhere, and whatever. Whereas we have really a very, very strong element of control as to who my daughter, sorry, it's knocking at the door, who my daughter sees, and she can roam completely freely. So she can travel. We don't have to be worried about, there's no traffic where we are. So we don't have to worry about that. She's not likely to get lost. She knows the place really well. So it's actually a really, really good place to have children. I can't deny that. That one you can see. And also, again, for her character, because of the calmness, because of the peace. I think children just respond better to that. What was the second point I was going to make? In terms of business. Well, being active in labour is actually a good thing, I think. It's perhaps when we're more idle that we tend to struggle more. So going to bed really physically tired, I think it's actually quite good for us spiritually. As long as it doesn't go over into taking away, you're so busy going, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. It takes away from the spiritual time where you need to be praying and reading, as long as you get that balance. But having physical labor to do, especially in the modern world, I think personally is a bonus for your spiritual life. So I don't find that, but you've got to make sure I think it's an issue of patience. There's no emergency. We know God's coming soon, but one always has to believe that God's timing is perfect and live accordingly. And therefore God knows how long, he knows we're only dust, he knows we get tired. So if we are going to gradually, bit by bit, if he's going to give the energy so we can transform it into the place we feel is right for the end of time, he will have given us enough time to do that, as long as we're not lazy. we don't have to overwork. And if that work is taking away from other aspects of our spiritual life, then we are overworking. So I guess it's that balance.